Hello, and welcome to our demo number 6. In today's demo, what we want to do is talk a little bit about databases and how they can be added to our projects. Any useful web application or any useful application for that matter is probably going to have to keep track of a lot of data and make sure that the data is consistent and make sure that the data represents the real world. So that's really what a database is for. And in this demo, what we want to talk about is this implementation of a database called Postgres, which if you've read through the Getting Started with Heroku on with Node.js tutorial, it would have told you to install a version or an instance of Postgres. So what I want to talk about here is essentially how we can set everything up locally and how we can sort of organize our workflow so that everything is smooth, and when we actually push something onto Heroku, that everything is still going to work. So in the past few demos, we've been talking a little bit about the server-side programming, which means we've been adding a bunch of routes to our server. So these app.gets, and remember last time we also talked about app.post. So whatever request that we're sending over to the server, I'm collecting that request and I'm responding doing something. Now, generally, it's probably not a good idea to have app.get, 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 and app.post. We should have probably a separate file for organizing the routes and everything like that. And later on, I'll do a separate demo on how we can clean up our code. But for now, just because everything's here and everything's kind of readable in this one file, I'm not going to change too much. I'm not going to kind of modularize too much, but I will show you that in a later demo. So right now, we want to just review what we've done. We've added a route, which is the root of our application. We added a route for database, which essentially takes our data and then it spits out some results. Now, up till now, this is just some made up data. Okay, so instead, what I want to do in the demo is that when I go to the slash database, I want to change this code so that instead of writing the results 1, 2, 3, 4, sorry, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out onto the screen, I want to add something a little bit more useful. Okay, so I want to actually grab it from the database that we're using and render it onto the page. All right, so I'm going to change the db.ejs file a little bit. As you go through the tutorial on Heroku, you probably have done something very similar to this. So the first thing that we need is we need a database, a Postgres database running on our local server. So the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need to navigate over to the Postgres download. So if we go to postgres.org/downloads and then whatever platform you're using. So if actually, let me go back one more here. Postgres.org or postgresSQL.org/download. Pick the platform that you'll be using. Right now I'm working on Windows. You can download the installer for the Windows. I've already installed everything, and I've also added the path. Okay, so the path for Postgres is going to be, sorry, let me just show you that right now. So the path variable that you have to set is well, if you do a default install with Postgres 12, it's going to be this one. So C program files Postgres SQL 12 bin. So that's on the Windows machine. I believe on the Mac machine, if you just install Postgres, it will already be there for you. So it will set all the path variables, and if you invoke PSQL, you should be able to run the SQL command. Sorry, Postgres SQL commands from there. All right, so let me just show you once you do the install and once you add the path to the environment, you should be able to invoke PSQL. Okay, I believe it's a similar command in Mac as well. So PSQL, the basic things that we need to connect to PSQL is we need to, because we're running a host locally, I'm going to type in -h and localhost. So this tells me that I have an implementation of Postgres running locally, and I'm going to call it localhost. And it is automatically going to connect via localhost for this database. Now, I also need to specify the user. So this is going to be -u with a capital letter. Now, the first time that we go into Postgres, the only user that's going to be available is this user called Postgres. And in fact, if you are running the Windows installer, I think also for the Mac installer, if you're running either of these installers, it will ask you for the default password for the user Postgres. Okay, so the user Postgres is like kind of like the root user. Um, so you have to set a root password. All right, so I think this is all I need for now. I'm going to log in. It's going to ask me for the password for the user Postgres. I've set a password, okay? And the password that I set for Postgres is root, R-O-O-T, and you're going to see that as we set this up later on. But right now we're in this, we're in the Postgres, uh, environment, I guess. And there's a couple of things that you can play around with for now. So if we do list, all right, so basically this shows us all of the databases that are currently in Postgres. So you have the list of databases. There's a one called Postgres. The owner is the Postgres owner. And then you have a template 0, template 1. These are all just databases that you can use. I actually don't want to use these default databases. I want to create a database. So I'm going to create database called users. Okay, so this is where I want to create, where I want to put the database that I'll be using for this demo. I'm going to have a database called users. Okay, so it created the database, and right now if we do a list again, we should see a users database. So I'm going to use the users database. Let's see, maybe it's changed. Users, sorry, get my syntax wrong. So C is changed to the users database. Okay, so you're now connected to the database users as user Postgres. Okay, now you can take a look at the reference for Postgres, and you're able to create other users as well. So if you don't want to use the user Postgres, you can use other users as well. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to leave it as Postgres. You can see that I'm actually currently in that database users, and we can do a /DT, which stands for data table. So right now there are no relations because we haven't created any tables, but let's create a table called user. Okay, so I'm going to create table user. All right, so just to differentiate between the two, I'm just going to do USR. Okay, so USR stands for user. And the notation that we use for Postgres is that we have, we can list out all the columns of this table along with the data type that we want. So as an example, we can do something like create table user, and then we can do, let's say, user ID, right, which is characters. Let's say we have 10 characters. And we could also have, let's say, fname, and let's say fname, first name also has char 10. And we can create something else, age, integer. Okay, so so again, you can refer to the reference on how to create tables and what types of data types are in Postgres SQL. So so right now I'm creating a table called user, And this user has a UID, so user ID, which has 10 characters, first name, which has 10 characters, and an age, which is an integer. So the way that we can kind of visualize this is that this is going to give us a table that has 3 columns. So the first column is the UID, which is characters, which is a bunch of characters, and then we have fname, which is again a bunch of characters, and then we also have age, which is an integer. And presumably, whenever we enter users in there, it will be entered as rows. So if we have 3 users, we would enter 3 rows in here. Okay, so how we can uh, enter values into the database is that we can use the insert command. So right now we've created a table. If we take a look at the data tables now, it'll say there's one data table, which is called user, okay? And the owner is Postgres. If I wanted to insert into this table, I can do something like insert and then into user, okay, values. Now, the values that I enter in here, it has to be the same as the same order as I've described it. So the UID, fname, and age has to be in that order. So UID, let's say I assign it to be 1. Actually, I did say it's a string. So let's say 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then first name Bob and age 33. Okay, so this basically inserts a new user corresponding to Bob, and he is 33 years old. Okay, so this is going to give us some feedback, and this is going to say that this is inserted properly into our table. We can do another insert. So let's say we have a user ID, I don't know, 345, and let's say this person's name is Jane, and Jane is 45. And I've inserted another person, and we can keep doing this, right? So, all right, so let's say that, I don't know, we do another one. Let's just do 567, and then this person's name is John, and John is also 45. All right, so now I have 3 rows of data, and we can imagine that I've just created a table with those values in there. So, you know, we have the UID 1, 1, 2, 3 in there, and then 3, 4, 5, and then 5, 6, 7. Okay, something like that. All right. So if we ever forget what the description of the table looks like what are the actual columns that are in our table, a nice command would be /d. We can do /d and user, and we can see that this gives us all of the columns as well as what data types we've been using to describe those columns. So this user table has 3 columns: UID followed by fname followed by age, and then they have their specific types. If you've taken a course like database, you probably know that there's a lot more that we can do to set constraints for our tables. I'm not going to talk about it here because you probably will figure it out throughout the development stage, but it's not too important for what we're doing here. All right, so let's do a few more things. If I ever want to see the rows that I currently have, I can do a select star from user. Okay, so so when I do a select star from user, this is basically a keyword. The select is a keyword and from is a keyword. So star is indicating, tell me all of the columns. So show me all of the columns from the table user. And I want you to show me, all the rows. Okay, so right now I have all of these rows. Okay, but what if I wanted to select only certain rows? Okay, so another variation of this command is select star from user, and then the keyword where. Okay, so here, select is a keyword, from is a keyword, where is a keyword, and then where, after where, I need to specify a condition. I can say where age is equal to 45. So this should only collect for me those two people whose age is 45. We need a semicolon. I don't think I mentioned that yet, but we do need a semicolon for Postgres. All right, so this is going to return for me 2 rows. Okay, I think we have enough to do some things on our database. I'll show you one last command, which is the delete command. So actually 2 more commands. I'll show you delete and update as well. So if I do a delete, I need a from. So delete from our keywords, user. Okay, delete from user, and then we can do where. Okay, if we don't specify where, that basically deletes all of the values in the table. So delete from user where, let's say UID equals 123. So I'm going to delete Bob. Okay, so forgot the semicolon. Sorry, it was supposed to be was supposed to be 123 in characters because it's a character. Okay, so delete from user where UID equals and then the characters 123. All right, so now one is successful. If we go back and select from user, so if we do a selection from the user, only those 2 people remain. All right, so just for our sake, let's insert this person back in, and now let me do an update. So right now, if I do a select star from user, couldn't find the insert button on my keyboard. So from user, okay, so this is going to give me these people. Now I can do an update. So for example, if I wanted to change this person's F name from Bob to Bobby, okay, so I'm going to update from user set F name. Sorry, no from. You don't need a from. Update user set F name to be equal to Bobby. Where. Now, this where is again a condition. So I can say where the F name is equal to Bob. Now, I could have actually found this guy in a different way. So I could have also done something like UID equals to 123. Okay, I could have also found it like that. Now, typically in a table, we have a unique ID for certain columns. So ID typically refers to the fact that we can't really duplicate this. So 123 is going to uniquely identify this person, Bob. So I think this would be a better way to do an update. So I'm going to do that. And so this is going to change this one person's name from Bob to Bobby. And so if I do a select star from user again, I'll see that this person's F name has been updated. Now, just as an aside, if I had done something like set F name where let's say age is equal to 45. Now you'll notice that 2 people actually satisfy that condition. So both of these people would be changed. Okay, so we have to be very careful about how we do updates. I'm not going to do this because I do want to keep the table as is. Okay, so this is basically the way that we can go into our database and we can kind of alter the data as is. So right now, everything is done locally. So I'm going to do a /q, which quits our database. Now, I just want to keep in mind right now that we were using this database called users. Okay, I was a user called Postgres, and there is a table called USR. I just want you to note those 3 things. Okay, so I'm going to quit right now, and I'm going to jump into my application. I'm going to show you very quickly how we can connect our application to this database. So the first thing that we're going to need is if we're using a Postgres database, that we're going to need that package. Okay, so at the very top, I'm going to add that package. So, I'm going to add some code here, maybe just underneath my port. I'm going to have a const, and I'm going to create a pool. Okay, the pool is actually a one of the attributes that's inside of the object that we would get by calling on the PG package. Okay, so when we call on the PG package, we have this pool. Um, uh, well, it's a constructor pool. Okay, then I'm gonna create a pool, var pool, and our pool is going to be equal to new pool. So this is the constructor that we're going to make. By the way, if you followed along with the tutorial that's online, you probably have very similar code. So for the pool, we're going to need to input some values in there. So um, so for this object, we're going to need the connection string. Okay, so connection string is the property, and we need to pass in a connection string. Now, before we kind of dump this into our um, Heroku, I just want to be able to connect locally to this database. Okay, so so I'm going to show you what the connection string looks like. So connection string is a string that connects you to the database. So right now, I want you to connect through the Postgres scheme. Okay, so this specifies the scheme Postgres, and it's going to use a specific port to connect to Postgres. Okay, so I'm going to connect to Postgres. Root. Okay, so this Postgres is describing the user. Okay, so this is the user Postgres. Don't get this mixed up with this. This is the scheme. This is like, you know, the what implementation are we using, right? But this is the user Postgres, and this is my password. Okay, so password is ROOT. It's probably not a good programming style to actually put your password into the connection string, but since I'm just showing you, I'm just going to. And then we need an @ symbol. We were connecting through localhost, right? So we have a host that's sitting locally in our computer, and I was connecting to a database called users. Okay, so / and then the database. Okay, so this is basically what we need for now, right? So I have all of this here that I need to connect to that specific database called users, right? So, so once again, this is our scheme. This is the user Postgres. This is the password. This is where the host is, which is local. And this is the database called users. All right, I'm going to save this. And the first thing we'll do is just make sure that everything connects properly. So I just want to do everything kind of one step at a time. So let's see here. I want to connect to the database. All right. So, so before I write the code in for the database, I actually want to do the installation of npm from npm. So before I forget, so I'm in the root directory of my application. I'm going to do an npm install, and this package called pg. All right, so I've installed the package, and right now I have PG listed. If you take a look at our package.json, you should be able to see that PG is now part of our dependency. So Postgres is now part of our dependency. So now we can use PG, you know, the functionalities of the PG. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is to basically make a query to the database. So this this line right here has already created a connection to the database. Okay, so presumably this would make the connection to the database, and now we can invoke query to be able to call the queries on the database. So much like what I was showing you before, I can invoke commands like update and insert and select. Okay, so so let's say when I go to database that I actually want to invoke um, a query that just selects all of the rows from the users table. Okay, so I'm going to do a var and we'll call this get users. Okay, it's probably get users query. It's probably good to label these variables with as much detail as possible because um, it'll show the reader how what you're trying to query, right? Okay, so here I'm just going to have a query like select star from. Now, remember our table is called user, USR, right? So select star from user. Oh, by the way, SQL doesn't have, it is case insensitive. So lowercase select and uppercase select mean exactly the same thing. So I have this users query, and now the command is pool dot query. And I'm going to pass in, so there's going to be two parameters. The first parameter is the query itself. Okay, so I'm going to pass in the query. There's going to be a callback function, and this callback function is going to have two objects. There's an error object and also a result object. Okay, so as the name suggests, the error object is going to be set when there is an error. So if there's an error that goes wrong with this query, the error object will be set. So if there's an error, then I'm going to response.end, and I'm going to send the error. So I'm essentially going to send this object if there's an error that happens. All right, but otherwise, I am going to, well, actually, if we ended this, then it would end anyway. So I'm just going to continue writing. So otherwise, var, I'm going to call this results. The results is going to be equal to the rows. Now I'm going to just have an attribute rows, and this is going to come back from the result dot rows. So in this result object, one of the attributes is going to be called rows, and that's going to contain all of the results, right? So those three people that I have in the database, they're going to be in the attribute result.rows. So I'm just going to copy this over to an object called rows, because you'll see in a second that I'm going to need this to display it on the database. Okay, so then I'm going to send in this results. Okay, so I'm going to send results over to the pages/db. All right, so let me go through this one more time. I'm going to query the database. I'm going to pass in this query, select star from user. There's going to be an error and a result object. If there's an error object that is set as a result of this query, I'm just going to end the response. Okay, and I'm going to pass through. I'm going to pass that error object. On the other hand, if the results is set, then there would not be any error. So I'm going to create a variable called results. I'm going to have a parameter called rows, and I'm going to pass in result.rows, which is essentially an array of the results. So it's an array of these rows that are set. All right, I'm going to pass this over to pages/db. I'm going to jump over to that in 1 second. Okay, so you see results, right, is coming from this thing right here. So results, actually it's not. I need rows. So I need to change this to rows. Okay, so for the rows attribute, for each of those, I'm just going to print out the R. Now, this is going to, I don't know how well this is going to print out. This might just print out object, but hopefully this will at least allow me to be able to do a little bit of debugging if I did anything wrong. So right now, I'm just going to go over to my command prompt, and I want to set I just want to run this application. Okay, I just want to make sure everything is connected properly, and I can actually connect to the database and there's no errors. So I'll do Heroku local. All right, so right now it is listening on port 5000, and navigate over to my browser and go to localhost 5000 and then /database. All right, so hopefully what's going to happen here is that it's going to come to this, and we're going to be able to connect to the database and hopefully get some results. But if not, we're going to get some kind of error that's going to get fed back, and we're going to have to do a little bit of debugging. All right, so right now you see that in fact it comes back, and you notice what happens. I have this LI, right? So it's basically this listed item, and it's printing out R, but the R is actually an object, right? So you see, I have 3 objects that's currently in the database. We had what were the 3 objects? If I scroll up a little bit here. Oh, I cannot scroll up. So I had, why can't I? Okay, so I had Jane, John, and Bobby, right? So I had those 3 rows, and they are essentially represented as objects. So that's why you're seeing that if I just print out the R, right, that you're seeing just object, object. Okay, but what if we did something like R dot, and then let's see, we have a UID, we have F name and age. So let me print out UID. Right, so this is going to print out their ID, and then let me just do comma, and I'm going to print out their age, r.age. Okay, so let's do something like that, and I just want you to see the notation here. Every time we have a less than and percent and equal, it's equivalent to a print statement. Okay, so print RUID. Okay, this again, print the R age, and this closes the bracket. All right, so let me save this. There's nothing to save here, and I'm just going to restart the server. You could also do nodemon on this, and you could have a automatic restart of your server. So right now it's still listening, and let's go back to Chrome and let me refresh this. So localhost 5000 database. If I refresh this, it now gives me the UID for all of those people as well as the age of those people. Okay, so hopefully this will, you can start to see the things that we can do with this, right? So I invite you to take this code and see if you can create a table out of this. Okay, so try to create a table, just that looks something like this. Okay. All right. So so without getting into too much detail, because this is part of the assignment as well, so you can have other routes here that allow you to be able to do other things with the users, right? So for example, if you remember what we did last time with the /users and the ID, right? So the purpose of this ID is that now if I wanted some information specifically about this user, let's say this user 123, okay, then presumably the route that I want is going to be /users /users /123. And what I want to do here is to be able to collect this ID and then to make a database query within this route. I hope you understand what I mean by this. Okay, so you see here, I have a comment that says search the database using the ID, right? The user ID. So I could add code here to search based on that UID. And again, how we would do that is we would invoke the query. Let's see, do we have it here? Something like this, select star from user where instead of age, we would have UID equal to 123, or UID equal to whatever this ID is that you're passing in. All right, so I hope you understand. You start to understand how the database can play a role in this program. And in fact, this will be very useful for your next assignment. All right. So let's see, what else do I want to talk about here? Okay, so one last thing about working locally, and then we'll talk about how this can be expanded for, for your server as well. So if we jump into our local host here again, and I'm just going to stop this right now. All right, and I'm going to jump back into our Postgres. Okay, so right now, so I'm going to type in our password. Right now, if we go into our users database and we do a select star from user, right? This is the same 3 people that we have. Now, what I want to show you is that there's 2 ways to make alterations to your database. One, we can create a path for that. Right? So when the person navigates to a path and they change something about a user, or if they add a user, right? So you can take a look at what we're doing here. We can add a user. And when we add a user, we can invoke a query that directly adds something into our database, right? So that's one way to do it. But we can also do it directly from the interface here. So I can do insert into user values. And then I could just add the UID. Let's say 789 and Steve and age 55, something like that, right? So I can add it directly from the interface here. So if ever something goes wrong, if I'm doing some testing, right, and something goes wrong, I can jump into Postgres and I can make those changes, right? So for example, if I wrote some code and I accidentally deleted everything, I can jump back into Postgres and I can make those alterations here. So let's just make sure everything is right. Okay, so I've inserted everything here, and that's what my database looks like so far. Okay, so I hope this kind of gives you an idea how we can test locally. Now, notice that I haven't talked about the server yet, right? So I haven't talked about Heroku yet in any way. Right now, as is, if I push the code up to Heroku and I navigate to whatever the URL is for Heroku, it won't work. Okay, so the reason is because although I have a database running locally on my server, I don't have it running on Heroku. So there's one last thing that I want to change here before I push everything and show you how to push everything up to Heroku, which is, do you remember our connection string here? Okay, the connection string still says localhost. If we push this up to Heroku as is, then there's going to be a problem because there's no localhost on Heroku, right? There's going to be a connection string that Heroku will give us. Okay, so again, when we push up to Heroku, there's going to be a connection string that Heroku will give us. So instead of providing this connection string, I'm going to do process.env.database URL. So this is a keyword. So when Heroku gives us a database, there automatically will also set an environment variable in our server called database URL. Okay, so it's going to set that connection string for us on the production server. Okay, so now this should be ready to be pushed up to Heroku. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about how to provision the database on Heroku. Okay, so if you follow the instructions for getting started on Heroku, there's an instruction for this already. Okay, so you probably already have done this, but if you haven't, then we need to invoke the command Heroku addons create Heroku Postgres Postgres SQL, and then the level that we want is just a hobby dev. All right, so this says on the Heroku website, on my server, I want you to create a Heroku Postgres SQL. I want you to create an instance of it. Okay, and this instance has its limitations, but for the most part, if we're just doing kind of a small demo of our application, this should be enough for us to play around with. Okay, so when we do this, it's going to add, hopefully. All right, so it's going to add a database. Now, remember earlier, remember what we said? I said, I need to add this process.environment.database URL. So automatically, Heroku has added this database. So it's created this database for us, this database instance for us, and it's already put it into the environment variable in our production as database underscore URL. So when we run this code, it's going to automatically grab that connection string for us. Okay, so we don't have to do anything. Heroku has already done that for us. Okay, now you might be asking at this point, well, wait a minute. What's going to happen to us if we now develop locally, right? What's going to happen? Okay, so let's answer that question in a second. But right now, all right, so it says, yeah, you can take a look at this Heroku Addons docs and Heroku Postgres SQL to look at the documentation. And I invite you to do that, definitely. But if we go into our database here, sorry. All right, so if we go into the database that is in our server right now, or if we want to do that, then we do Heroku PG, okay, PSQL. All right, and again, this command was given to you in the tutorial as well, but if we invoke this, this is going to jump us into the database. So right now, you see, we're in the database that's on our server. Okay, now I want to draw you a very quick picture. So what I was showing you earlier was basically our local development environment. So this is local to my computer. Okay, so this is my computer. So local computer. Okay, so when we were running this application before, when we invoked Heroku local, we had our app running, right? So we had our app, and then the app was actually talking to a database, so PSQL, right? That was sitting local on my computer, and we invoked a local host, right? So we used localhost to connect to the PSQL that's sitting locally on my computer. And I created this table with user, right? So with USR. So there was a table here with the user. This was our users table, right? And it had all those columns that we created. But now we are connected to the remote PSQL. So there's another database that is remotely sitting on our server. And this right now doesn't have any of our tables. Okay, so now in order to make everything consistent, we're going to have to basically make our table look exactly like this again. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go here and right now, just to show you that I have no database tables, right? So there's no relations. Okay, but I'm going to create a table called user. And if you remember the the things that I wrote before, there was a UID, there was an F name and an age, right? So our UID was characters, 10 characters. Our F name was also 10 characters, and our age was an integer. So I'm basically going to type in the exact same thing that I did in my local database on the server. So this will keep things consistent. All right, so now the table is created. If I do a select star from user, you see, nothing. I didn't import anything yet. Sorry, I haven't inserted anything yet. So if I wanted the data in production, in my production database, to have the same values as this, I would have to do the insertions. But it's not a good idea because this is in production. So you can imagine that this is our application that's sitting in the internet, right? People can use it, right? So oftentimes I leave this empty just because this is now going to be, it's going to represent data from the real world, right? In the real world, there's no person named Steve that's 55. Well, at least, you know, you know what I mean, right? So there's no user that I have that I want to record that is Steve and 55. These are just test data that I'm using locally to test out my application. Right, so I hope you're following everything that I'm saying here, but essentially you can see that what I now need to do is if my application is working locally, right? So I'm going to test out everything that I need to test out locally, make sure everything works here, and then I'm going to push everything remotely. So now the app is going to then connect to the PSQL that is sitting on our server. Okay, and this is going to be the workflow as we do bigger and bigger projects. Okay, so I hope you can see everything kind of fitting in together. All right, so the last thing I want to do here is just to make sure that everything is good. I'm going to quit this. So /q is going to jump me back to my local machine. I'm going to now push everything to Heroku. Okay, so I'm going to do the git add. Okay, so I'm going to add everything that I've changed so far. I'm going to do a git commit and connect it to database. I might not be able to push here. Let's try if I can push here. So git commit connected to database. Let's be a little bit more descriptive. So connected to database, route is database. All right, so this gives me a description of what I changed in our code. And now I'm going to do a git push Heroku master. So push it to the Heroku master branch. Okay, let's see if we can do this. Okay, looks like everything's building properly. So you notice that as we did that, all the color codes changed. So that means everything is now up to date. We can do an Heroku open, and that should open up my application. Okay, so there's my comp276 demo.herokuapp.com, and then I'm going to navigate to database and to see if that actually works. Okay, so it does say database results. Remember, the database that we were working with in production had nobody in there, right? Well, maybe we can do just one last thing here. Let's connect to there and let's put some people in there. Okay, so insert into user values. All right, so the first one was 1, 2, 3, and let's call this person Joe. And Joe is 23. Okay, so let's just insert this value in there. I'm going to quit my database. And right now my app is going to read from that database. So if I do a refresh, right, it should read Joe. And right now, since we're just printing out the UID and the age, that's what it prints out. Okay. All right. So that, in short, is how we're going to add a database to our application. Now, there are other things in the assignment that we need, like such as giving the functionality to update, to delete, to be able to show all the attributes of one particular user, or one particular person, I think we called it. So I'll let you kind of play around with that. Generally, there's no, it doesn't really matter if you put everything on one page or whether you separate it into different pages, right? So you can put everything onto one page, or you can, you can separate them into routes like I've done here. It's totally up to you how you want to set it up. Okay, so do play around with that. It'll give us a good chance to kind of understand how the app connects to the database and is able to get data and display the data from the database. Okay, so I hope this was useful. I will see you guys in the next demo.